Let us welcome Mihai Ionescu, most awaited speaker. So thank you, sir, again joining. Mihai don't need any introduction, but however, I'll do it. Today, we talk about the adaptive role of strategy execution as we know it, okay, from Mihai. Mihai spent, I think, more than 16 years, I know, from 2008 onwards, on understanding and refining strategy full cycle processes. Finally, we reached a stage where we have a strategy cycle, which is, I think, functioning now, which is very, very interesting framework as a compilation of all, including the best practices, and then closing some gaps in the current management practices. Okay, so welcome, Mr. Mihai. Just to give you a few words about Mihai is, so Mihai is a thorough practitioner, technician, and also expert in strategy management. He synthesized an integral framework connecting key concepts, theories, and methodologies of strategy management. His approach encapsulates strategy thinking essence while providing practical insights. So welcome, Mihai. Over to you, sir, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to connect with Samir's presentation. He obviously it's some sort of glorious example of how when you apply the Kaplan and Norton balanced scorecard framework into practice, you get some excellent results, but also an excellent platform for learning. And what he explained from his experience in working within the Office of Strategy Management and working with finance, it's really very, very valuable, because that's a proof of practice, and that kills very easily all sorts of fantasy frameworks that try to replace the Kaplan and Norton execution premium process. Okay, so maybe to complement his presentation, I just want to highlight one additional point. He spoke mostly about the strategy execution cycle. So we have a strategy and we need to implement it, and we have a number of consecutive annual strategy plans, and we integrate them with budgeting and with operational planning, and we execute a share of the strategy each year as we take a share of the strategic gaps that the strategy told us that we must close in order to fully implement it, and we close those gaps in that year, in that annual cycle. But before we even start thinking about the first implementation cycle of the strategy, you might remember from something that was previously discussed. It's about validating the strategy before starting to implement it. And validating it actually means at least two things, and one of them is the feasibility of implementing the strategy. So will we be able to implement this strategy? It may be a fantastic strategy, and an extraordinary one, promising exceptional results, but are we going to be able to implement it? It requires us to close some gaps in infrastructure, in processes, in relationships, in competencies, and there are lots of other things that we have a limited time frame to implement the strategy. So one of the elements there is related to being able to finance the strategic initiatives that we anticipate to be required to close those gaps, at least the most important ones. So that's another moment when we invite the finance department into this, not into the strategic planning part, but into the strategy formulation cycle, or even reformulation, as we might do every year, and ask their support in allowing us to see if, from the financial point of view, will we be able, in each of the following execution cycles, annual execution cycles, will we be able to finance the initiatives that will allow us to close the gaps that we allocate for each of those annual cycles. And their feedback, it's extremely important, because if they say, I'm sorry, in year 3 we won't be able to finance all those things. We don't foresee any possibility to get the finance to do that. That's too ambitious. So try to scale down, go back through strategy formulation, and maybe create a more feasible one. Or maybe reshuffle some of the initiatives or gaps closing from year 3 to year 4 or to year 2 in order to make strategy feasible as we can anticipate before we start any planning, that we can anticipate at the end of our strategy formulation cycle. So that's important. And then, of course, we can involve the finance department also in the second validation gateway, which is the viability of the business models that will require to support our value propositions that result from implementing the strategy and being able to launch into the marketplace new value propositions that are substantiating our strategic choices. And of course, each of them is using a specific business model, and that business model needs to make money, to be profitable, at least to be able to close the financial balance as we launch the new value proposition and maybe a new or a modified business model. So finance, again, it's required there, not into the strategy execution part, not into the implementation of the strategy, when we need to integrate StratEx with the budgeting, and we need to anticipate the changes produced by executing the strategic plan to the finance people and also to other departments for their operational planning reasons. We also need to involve them early into the strategy formulation cycle, because they are the voice of reality. Will we be able to implement this strategy? Once we implement it, the outcome of implementing the strategy in terms of sustainable business models will that happen? So that's an important contribution also, including for the finance department and for budgeting, because finance always has some sort of long-term planning. There are a lot of people which actually don't do financial planning or budgeting only for 1 year. They tend to perform more and more often some multi-annual planning in terms of financial function. Okay, so that was just trying to complement Samir's presentation. Let me share the stuff that I have available for today. I hope that you can see it. Maybe Abdul, can you confirm that you can see the presentation?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so we know that once we have formulated a strategy for a couple of years, how we need to start implementing it. And implementing it, it means a lot of things. It means communicating it, making all the employees aware of where the company is heading. Also make aware our most important partners, our most important customers, the suppliers, of what our strategy is for the next couple of years. And once we validate that it's a strategy that we can implement, and it's also the result will be viable, then we start with the first execution cycle. And we need multiple execution cycles, more specifically multiple annual execution cycles, because that's how things work in practice. We have a lot of annual planning done in any company, and it's better to synchronize the execution of the strategy by dividing the implementation of the strategy, by breaking down, for instance, the multiple strategic gaps that we need to close, and say, okay, in the year 1 we will close these gaps, in the year 2 we close these gaps, and if some of those gaps are leading us to the critical mass of capabilities required to support a value proposition, one of many value propositions that are substantiating our strategic choices to be able to surmount the paramount challenges that we have identified, which requires us to create a new strategy. Then, of course, then we will be able to start planning the first part, the first cycle. Okay, so that's the strategic execution cycle, and we're going to talk about one particular aspect of strategy execution. Let me see, what does it require me to go to the next slide? Okay, so here it is. So strategic execution is something that is required to implement a strategy. If people are denying the concept of strategy execution, they're actually clueless about what does it require to implement the strategy. Implementing it is turning from whatever we have on any whiteboard, on any documents that we have created and turning it into something that happens in reality. We need projects that are going to create new capabilities, install new systems, define new processes, bring in people with required competencies that we never did require before, and a variety of other things. We need to create relationships, start a new sales channel, maybe a variety of things that we need to do practically, and typically we do that with projects that we call strategic initiatives. Okay, so that's how we implement the strategy. We focus on the gaps, that if we could close them by tomorrow morning, we would have our strategy fully implemented by tomorrow morning, and we would just start harvesting the benefits of our strategy. And the benefits, of course, are mostly to the capability to surmount the paramount challenges that we have identified in the future of our organization. So the execution cycle, it has been very clearly designed by Kaplan and Norton to follow the Deming cycle, the plan, do, check, act cycle. So we do this strategic planning, and then we run the initiatives, we perform the initiatives that are part of the plan after we have aligned them and after we have performed the operational planning and budgeting integration, and we do that. And as we start launching the sequence of strategic initiatives, we will have to check the results, and we have the scorecards typically for performance and risk, and then something happens. The scorecards are turning, some of the objectives are green, some are yellow, some are red, and we ask, why did that happen? So that happened because somewhere along the strategy formulation cycle or along the strategic planning process, we have employed some invalid hypotheses. Now, there is no other way to employ hypotheses, because we are doing something related to the future. Strategy is about the future, the strategic plan is about the future. So there is no other way but to employ some hypotheses about how things will happen, about some causalities that we expect to see in reality. So that's what the check stage is. It's actually looking at our results of the output. The output, it comes the immediate deliverables of a project, to make it simple. And then the outcomes, it's what happens after we have got we have got some outputs from our projects, which is the final effects that we're trying to obtain by closing those gaps and seeing what happens in our organization, in the marketplace, as we launch or improve our value propositions and so on. So that's the check act, and the act is actually a part that allows us to say, okay, so we've got some invalid hypotheses. Some of our hypotheses are always invalid, but we do not know which ones. So therefore, we'll find out as we implement our strategy, as we perform our strategic initiatives. We look at the scorecards, at the outputs and outcomes, and say, okay, that was not what we expected in some cases. So where did we go wrong? So we need to go back and look at the initiative, at the hypothesis that we have employed, and try to understand what kind of correction should we apply. Now, there are two things that we do as part of this, let's say, feedback part after we have done the strategic planning, the alignment, the operational integration, and then we execute the strategic plan. And of course, we do that at the departmental level, at individual levels. That's where the strategy is executed. So that's what we do. We do some corrective actions typically upon the strategic initiatives, because the scope of the projects might not have been well defined, or the timing, or the resources allocated, and we'll do some sort of corrective actions typical for project management. But then we also, even if the strategic initiatives went well, okay, so still the results, the outcomes are not the right ones, or even the outputs that anticipates the outcomes. And at that time, we need to say, okay, something was wrong, not in strategic planning, not in designing these projects, the strategic initiatives, but before that, in defining the gaps that we need to close, in defining the required capabilities to support the activity systems that we have created for the value propositions that are substantiating our strategic choices that we have made, and therefore we need to go back and replace those invalid hypotheses with the right ones, and obviously modify at some extent the strategies that we have formulated. So do some sort of partial reformulation of the strategy, and as a consequence, we will do a partial replanning, changing at some extent the strategic plan for this year, and we'll do the same. Obviously, we'll have an updated strategic plan next year and the following ones. Okay, so that's the story about strategy execution, the cycles that we use for strategy execution, and what the revise part of the cycle means, with its corrections and adaptation. Okay, now we've learned all that from the Kaplan and Norton, and you know, I think that Samir was a great example of an organization who uses the Kaplan and Norton balanced scorecard framework, which is also called the execution premium process. And I know that there are many people who are trying to make a better mouse wheel and reinvent stuff and say, well, we have the same balanced scorecard, but with different stages or with different ideas. Well, I'm sorry, but the proof of reality tells us that the only trustworthy framework for balanced scorecards is the Kaplan and Norton one. And there are more than 10,000 projects that have been either implemented by Palladium or evaluated as part of the assessment for the not just for the Hall of Fame, but also as part of the assessment. I mean, the Hall of Fame, typically one company was selected out of typically 10 assessments that were performed upon others. And it didn't mean that the other 9 were not good implementation of the Kaplan and Norton balanced scorecard framework. They simply needed to select the best ones, and the best ones got into the Hall of Fame. So there are many implementations that show us that the framework that has been created and experimented and improved continuously over almost 30 years by Palladium. Of course, Palladium doesn't focus anymore on a balanced scorecard implementation, but the wealth of knowledge and of know-how and the body of knowledge that resulted from thousands and thousands of implementations are continuing to inspire us and tell us what is good and wrong, and which are the best practices for actually executing the strategy, for implementing the strategy. Okay, so however, we needed to advance because at least for the past 5 years or so, further development on the execution premium process hasn't been performed anymore. So we needed to move further. And one of the things that challenged me was how to use the Kaplan and Norton execution premium process in a way that it's more detailed on the strategy formulation side. So we had this stage 1 in execution premium process, which is develops the strategy. But what I needed from the practical implementations that I've been part of was to have a more clear process for how do we formulate strategy. So you see that on the right side in the what I call the strategy clockwork, which is a full cycle of the strategy at a similar consistent level of detail. We have the stages 2 to 6 in the execution in the strategy execution cycle, the one on the right. But also we have actually blown up the stage 1 which was only one stage, into a full cycle of strategy formulation, giving more details about how do we do that. And there are a lot of frameworks, a lot of concepts and theories which are actually embedded into the stages 1 to 5 that you see on the strategy clockwork. A variety of things. You need to actually go through hundreds of books and try to distill and refine the concepts that are actually connecting very well logically one to another, and get a logical and clear cycle of going from strategic analysis to strategic choices, activity systems, capabilities, strategic gaps, viability, and then to actually do the implementation of the strategy. So this is probably an evolution towards a more consistently detailed view of the same cycle that was actually created and implemented so many times using the execution premium process. Okay, and of course we also have the strategy experimentation, because it's something that it's enriching our capability to take good decisions and to improve the ratio between valid and invalid hypotheses that we use as part of strategy formulation. Okay, so what do we mean by strategy execution? Let me go back again and just go to the basics. I know that many of you are very familiar with this, but I just wanted to clarify again which are the steps. So the first step that we have, it's actually the next slide. The first step, it's actually the strategic planning part. And you see, we have here as zooming into the strategy clock around the strategy execution cycle, we have the stage number 6 coming after the validating of the strategy, which actually puts us into the strategic planning mode. And we obviously need to look at performance in terms of defining objectives and measures that are measuring our outcome and desired outcomes and outputs from performing the strategic initiatives associated with the strategic objectives. And the strategic objectives are actually built by aggregating strategic gaps that are allocated for this year to be closed. So that's a very easy and simple way to define the strategic objectives. And we also have the risk dimension. This risk dimension is related to the risk events associated with the objectives that we have defined, and how can we mitigate and how can we measure the exposure to those risk events, the likelihood and the impact or the consequence of those events, and obviously have risk mitigating initiatives designed for that. And we have something similar for the resilience, and that is related to our capability to pivot in case something happens unforeseen, happens during the strategy execution cycle, during the implementation of this part of the strategy. And then we have the alignment, the vertical and horizontal and individual alignment and external alignment. We have strategy communication for all the people who are not part of the strategic jobs families. They need to be fully aware of the strategy and how the execution progresses, and what are the results, and what new value propositions are launched as part of executing the strategy this year, and so on. So strategy communication, it's terribly important for all the people who are not involved in a way or another into the strategic initiatives that are performed for implementing this part of the strategy. And then, of course, we have the operational integration with the budget and the operational plans, sales, production, and other functions inside the organization. And of course, also with the continuous improvement, because we hand over some of the closing of the gaps which are related to, for instance, improving the maturity level of some of our capabilities or processes. We are handing that over to the continuous improvement on an annual basis, and they take care of closing those gaps, which are actually some gaps of improving what we have, not of creating something new in terms of capabilities. Okay, and then we go into okay, so we planned, we aligned, we integrated with operations, and now we need to start performing our initiatives. We launch the initiatives, the ones that are scheduled to be launched first, and then after them there are some others that are launched afterwards, and so on. And as we do this, we collect the results. We look at outputs from the initiatives, at outcomes that we measure after the what is called the realization of the initiatives. It's getting the fruits, the benefits of actually changing something, a capability, a process, a relationship, and a level of competency. And as we do that, we look at the results, and some of the results are not the ones that we've expected. And the reason is that we have employed a number of hypotheses, sometimes inside the strategy formulation cycle, sometimes inside the strategic planning cycle. I mean, maybe some of the initiatives haven't been adequately defined in order to address the need of achieving the objectives, which in other words means closing the gaps that we have used to aggregate inside each strategic objective. And there might be others related even to alignment, some hypotheses that we use, for instance, who's contributing to achieving an objective, which departments, and even going to individual people. Have we selected the right people to participate as in the project teams of certain strategic initiatives? And if something went wrong there, we assume that it will be fine, but it turned out that hypothesis was or assumption was invalid. So that's what we do in the first place. We look at the red statuses of our objectives and okay, KPIs, and say, okay, where does this come from? And first and foremost, we look at the initiatives, because that's a common source of malfunction. Something went wrong with those projects. Many things. People who are familiar with project management can tell you a lot about what can go wrong with the project. And first of all, we try to correct that. That's corrective action, so typically applied upon the strategic initiatives. So that's a review process. Every month we look at the results and say, okay, what kind of corrections do we need to produce and to apply, and then we typically hand over to the PMO, to the project management office, if we have something like this. And obviously they are coordinating the strategic initiatives as they might do with other operational level planning. Some plans that are not strategic initiatives. And okay, we expect next month or in the next couple of months to see, say, some improved outcomes from the corrected initiative. Sometimes it's working on ongoing projects, applying corrections to them. Sometimes if the project is finished and there is nothing more to correct about it, we just need to produce a new project that will add what was missing from the previous project, or changing something that some of the deliverables that were produced from that strategic initiatives, and so on. So this is our corrective actions that we need to take, and we typically take such decisions on a monthly basis. But there are situations where we can't identify anything wrong with the strategic initiatives. So what do we do? Well, at that time we try to look even further. Further means into the strategy formulation, and said, okay, something was wrong. Maybe those capabilities were not the right ones, or the strategic gaps haven't been adequately defined, or the activity system for the value propositions that we're preparing to launch haven't been the right ones. Maybe we missed something about what would make our customers be interested in our products or services that are part of that value proposition. So, or even the strategic choices haven't been rightly identified in order to allow us to surmount the paramount challenges that we needed to for which we needed our strategy and to implement our strategy. And at that time, we moved to the stage about strategy adaptation. We don't do that on a monthly basis because we don't want to rush in changing our strategy very quickly, unless there is something very obvious that was wrong. And typically we build the case for changing the strategy for 1 or 2 months, and typically on a quarterly basis, unless there is an emergency, as I said, something very obvious about the strategy being not entirely correct. Then we perform the adaptation of the strategy right away. And typically we have the, as you might remember, the early warning systems that actually monitors external parameters that were used as a hypothesis as part of our strategy formulation. And when that alarm is triggered, of course, we go and say, okay, something was wrong. We assume something that was part of our strategy. That assumption turned out to be wrong. And we need to change that part of the strategy. And of course, we do that. We update our strategy. As a consequence, we might update the strategic plan as well. And because it propagates to any changes of the strategy propagate to the execution cycle. And that's what we do. Okay, so this is something that we need to understand, that we have two functions, extremely important functions of executing the strategic plan, the aligned integrated strategic plan. So two functions of overall of strategy execution. So it's being able to apply corrective actions and continuously move towards something that is confirmed by the reality, because even when we do the strategic planning, we assume that reality will turn out in a certain way, and the corrective actions are because some of our assumptions, some of those hypotheses were not in line with the reality, and actually the corrective actions are bringing our strategy execution, our strategic plan execution, closer to the in line with the reality. And then strategy adaptation does even more, because even our strategy might not be entirely in line with the reality. As a matter of fact, let me tell you this: every time when we formulate a strategy and every time when we build a strategic plan, we are partially wrong. So from the very beginning, we need to understand that our strategy will never, when we formulate it, will never be correct. Part of it will be wrong, because it's impossible to have all the hypotheses that we have employed as part of strategy formulation to be correct, because we would be, just having a magic crystal ball that will tell us how the future will unfold. And of course we don't. So therefore, part of the strategy we know from the very beginning is wrong. Part of it. Because that's relied on some hypotheses that we assume that they are valid. Reality will tell us they are invalid. So we'll need always to have this adaptation functions as part of our strategy cycle. If we don't have that, it's like driving blindly on a highway full of cars, and of course we'll hit something when we do that. So that's what needs to happen, and the same happens with the strategic plan. Part of our strategic plan, aligned and integrated with budget and operations, is always partially wrong. Partially, which means that some of the hypotheses that we employed when we define the objectives and the initiatives and the system of measures and the weights, because we typically used to calculate statuses and so on, the way that we've aligned it and who contributes to what, and how horizontal alignment was performed. All of that was based on hypotheses, because that is about the future. We do something, we do some plan, and even alignment is about the future. Even the integration with the budget and operational planning is about the future. And we can't do that unless we use hypotheses, and some of them are always wrong. Some of them will always turn out to be invalid. We simply do not know which ones, because they are about the future. So that's what corrective actions are so much required, to be able to correct all the hypotheses that were not wrong. In reality, the scorecards, we use the term performance a lot, but in reality, the scorecards, you might remember the three types of reasons why you use measurement in relation to operations or strategy. And in our case, for strategy execution, we use measures first and foremost to validate the hypothesis that we have employed when we have designed the strategic plan, aligned and operationally integrated it, or hypothesis that we use when we have formulated the strategy. So that's important, and we need to understand that these two functions for corrective improvement of the strategic plan, or bringing the strategic plan to the reality of the marketplace where we see outcomes from our strategic initiatives. It's very important, and also very important is to adapt our strategy, because we know that our strategy is always partially wrong. So we need to bring it to become a correct strategy. In the end, after we have finished implementing and done a lot of adaptation, we'll have the implemented strategy, which will not be the same as the one that we started with, the intended strategy. Okay, so just to summarize the stages for anyone who has any doubts about this. So first of all, we do strategic planning. We group some of the strategic gaps that we have to close into strategic objectives. If you remember, we break down all the portfolio of gaps to close into annual cycles, and we take the next annual cycle, the gaps allocated to be closed in that cycle, group them into strategic objectives. We identify the strategic initiatives required to achieve those objectives, and therefore to close the strategic initiatives. And we have the measurement systems that allows us to identify invalid hypotheses as we execute the strategic plan. And that's it. We have, of course, the risk part and even the resilience part if we are advanced enough into implementing into managing strategy execution, typically after a couple of years of experience with the Kaplan and Norton execution premium process. Okay, so then we need to go to alignment. Nothing happens if we don't do alignment. Our strategic plan will remain completely or partially unperformed, but most probably completely unperformed, because strategy execution is performed at individual level, and alignment, surprising for many, is not about the departments and functions, what their objectives are and what their strategy maps and scorecards are. It's actually a stepping stone towards bringing strategy to individual level, because that's where the strategy gets executed, because those people are going to be part of the project teams of the strategic initiatives. If they don't understand what needs to be done and understand very well the strategy and what strategic gaps are we targeting to close, and what are we measuring in terms to figure out if something went wrong, if they don't understand that at individual level as part of those who are performing those strategic initiatives, or as part of those, let's say, secondary strategic job families or reactive ones who are contributing, even if they are not part of the project plans, but they are contributing to getting the outcomes from the strategic initiatives. If they don't understand and they are not being able to measure their contribution to those projects and how those projects went, because they contributed in a way or another to implementing those changes or to supporting the changes that have been implemented, that's, strategy won't be executed if we don't do that. So that's what's important to do. And of course, we can't get from company level to individual level. We need to go through the intermediary teams and departments and functions. We need to also understand how the horizontal alignment, because we have internal customers and internal suppliers everywhere in any organization. They are not independent, the functions are not independent of each other. And if someone changes some processes, for instance, or things that they do, their internal customers, their internal suppliers need to do the same thing, and that's horizontal alignment. It's very important, and if we miss that, again, it will be a lot of malfunctions into executing the strategic plan. So alignment, it's extremely important, and it goes also together with strategy communication, because not all the people are directly involved in strategic initiatives. They are not part of what Kaplan and Norton mentioned as being the strategic job families. So that's why we need to communicate very well to others. We need an entire communication plan to reach everybody and decide what kind of content are we delivering to whom, we're using which channel. It's an entire story about how to perform strategy communication. And I think that if you look at the execution premium process, you'll understand very well, because Kaplan and Norton have been very instrumental in describing how strategy communication needs to be done in an organization in parallel executing the strategy using balanced scorecards and their framework. Okay, so that's the alignment part. But then guess what? A lot of things are happening on the operational level. On the operational level, we do some sales planning and marketing planning and production planning and even research and development and logistics needs to plan how they are going to perform their function, and the sales channels, maybe stores or partners or a variety of things needs to have some planning about how they are going to do their work for the next year. And of course, above everything is the financial planning, which is budgeting. So now these things, first of all, imagine that we have no strategy. Okay, we have no strategy, we're making no changes, the same revenues, the same costs, the same channels, the same processes. So everybody is doing some planning, some sort of copying and pasting from last year and creating some plans or budget for next year, but let's increase by 5%. And that's how it would happen if nothing would change. But that's unrealistic. Something changes outside of our organization, even if we have a strategy or not. And even more, if we have a strategy, we will perform some changes. We're going to launch some new value proposition with products and services, use some new channels, have other revenue streams, have a different set of costs, including the cost of financing the strategic initiatives, but also another cost structure, because we might have some other let's say function or channels that we never had before, and they come with their cost. And obviously everybody needs to take into consideration what the strategic plan tells us that is going to change next year. So obviously they need to synchronize their operational plans and the budget with what the strategic plan tells them that is going to be different next year. For budget, for instance, what's the revenue how the revenue stream will change, and how the cost structure will change, and they need to take that into consideration. Okay, so that's what operational integration is needed. And of course, as I've mentioned, some of the operational activity include also the continuous improvement. We have a program for continuous improvement, Lean Six Sigma or something else, and normally they have a life of their own. But because we have a strategy, and strategy requires us to close some gaps which are not about things that we don't have. It's not about capabilities that we don't have. It's not about processes that we never did before. It's not about competencies which we never had. It's about changing them, adapting, reconfiguring them, bringing them to a different level. And that's the typical bread and butter for the continuous improvement program. So we hand over that part of the strategic gaps which are not about new things, and say, okay, we need to improve this process and that process and that level of competency and so on. So they are going to plug into their operational, into their continuous improvement program, a prioritization about what there needs to be targeted next year, and to what level of achievement do we need to bring that improvement. So that's operational integration. That's mandatory to be performed. And if you look at any so-called frameworks about balanced scorecard other than Kaplan and Norton, you won't find operational integration. Even alignment is wrongly placed in many of them. Okay, so that's the right sequence. Do the strategic planning at organizational level, perform the alignment, bring the strategic plan to the individual level, going through vertical and horizontal alignment, even external alignment with the critical customers and critical suppliers and so on. So we need to be in sync with them as well, and then performs the operational integration to understand there will be a smooth evolution of next year's things that happening inside the company, and the plans are adapted to what it's expected to be achieved. And of course, if we want to achieve some of those things that are considered as part of the strategic plan, we will adapt the plan or apply the corrections, and immediately inform the budget or the operational planning. Has there been some changes to the initial changes that we anticipated that we're going to perform next year? Okay, so that's operational integration. And then, of course, it's a correction. We will have cases where the results will be negative on the scorecards, on the performance, on risk, or even on resilience, if we reach that level of integrating resilience with together with performance and risk, strategic performance and the strategic risk. And correcting means actually identifying why is this objective red? Why have we reached these KPIs are telling us that the output or the outcomes from those initiatives are not the right ones? And we need to go back and say, okay, something was wrong with that project. Maybe the scope was wrong. Maybe the people involved there were not you having had the right competencies. Maybe the sponsorship didn't work. Maybe the escalation of some issues didn't function. So what did go wrong? And we need to apply some corrections. And again, if we employ the capabilities of the project management office, those people will be able to spot very well the malfunctions in the projects which are strategic initiatives. And with in working together with them, we will be able to apply the corrections and get closer in the next months or so into improving the outcomes that our strategic plan assumes that we're going to achieve. So again, related to closing some of the gaps that have been mandated to be closed by the strategy during this year. Okay, so that's the correction part, and then it's finally the adaptation part, because in case we applied the necessary corrections, the strategic initiatives seem to be fine. We could spot nothing wrong about our projects. So why our projects didn't deliver the outcomes that we wanted? Maybe we didn't close the right gaps. Maybe the capabilities were not the right combination. Maybe even the sequencing and the allocation to this year of closing some gaps were not correct one. We were supposed to correctly close them next year, and for whatever reason we assume that they can be closed this year, and that turned out to be an invalid assumptions or hypothesis. So we need to go back into where we did that in strategy formulation, change that part of the strategy, propagate it to the strategic plan, and of course the changes are going to be present in the next annual strategic plans. And we perform this adaptation. Is mandatory. Imagine that something changes in the competitive environment. There are some new competitors showing up in our market with some substitute solutions or something that actually disturbs significantly the market, and we assume that won't happen. Well, that was a wrong hypothesis. Now reality tells us that we should have considered that, and in considering that, we could have actually identified another type of threats, or even maybe some opportunities in the next couple of years. And our strategy was supposed to focus on a different set, not entirely different, but partially different set of paramount challenges. And as a consequence of that, some of our strategic choices should have been different. And then as a consequence of that, the value propositions that substantiated our strategic choices should have been different, one or more of them. And then, of course, the capabilities required wouldn't be the same. Some of them would be something that we never thought of, and as a consequence, some strategic gaps will result. And to close them, we will need to change the current strategic plan, the alignment, the operation integration, and so on. And as we execute the strategic initiatives, maybe some new strategic initiatives, and of course, the propagation of those changes will happen in the next execution cycles as well. So that's adaptation. That's an important function of strategy execution. Without it, it's virtually impossible to get a good strategy or some good outcome from implementing the strategy. Because again, as we implemented, the strategy must change, must be adapted, because reality never corresponds to our initial ideas. Some of our hypotheses are always wrong, some of them. So therefore, we need to spot which ones, adapt the strategy accordingly, and continue with a strategy that is, for the moment, synchronized with the reality, but that might need to be further adapted as we go to maybe to the next year or to later during the current execution cycle. So that's an important function of strategy execution, to adapt, allow us to adapt the strategy. And that's now the full cycle. If you watch the presentation that I had yesterday as part of the summit, that was focused on strategy formulation. Now we have the full cycle of strategy formulation, strategy execution, with all the stages required to start from strategic analysis, using the constraints provided by scenario planning, make a selection of the strategic choices using a library of choices, and then look into how do we translate those choices, which are just ideas on a whiteboard, into the reality of the value propositions, with obviously products and services targeting specific customer needs. And then to understand that in order for that to happen, we might need some capabilities, some of them that we never had before. And we need to identify which are the gaps. Some of gaps are about things that we never had before, we never did before, something like that, and they're full strategic gaps. Some others are things that needs to be reconfigured from what we have. Some processes needs to be changed at some extent, and maybe some competencies needs to be increased to a higher level. And things like this, it's altogether are a set of strategic gaps that as we close those strategic gaps or implementing the strategy, we're able to have the critical mass of capabilities to launch new value proposition into the marketplace, and then be able to confront and surmount the paramount challenges where we started from in designing our strategy. Paramount challenges related to the market, to the customers, to competition, to changing of the regulatory environment, to a variety of things. So we identified paramount challenges and we created a strategy to be able to surmount them. And then, of course, we execute the strategy, grouping the strategic gaps into objectives and associated initiatives, and all those things that I've described earlier today. And of course, don't forget that we need to perform the feasibility and viability validation before we even consider starting to implement our strategy. It's a sanity check. It's to the best of our capabilities, using everybody in the organization who can provide us information. I've given the example at the beginning of the budget of the finance people who need to be involved into assessing the feasibility. Will we be, from the financial point of view, our resources constraints along the couple of years as we implement the strategy, and they need to give their feedback. Will we be able to mobilize the financial resources required in each of those years to perform the strategic initiatives? And then as we do that, what about the balance of revenue and cost for the value propositions and associated business models that we're going to launch along these years as we implement our strategy? Okay, so that's the full story. And I think that I'm 3 minutes past the time allocated. I would just use the opportunity to.
So you can take a few more minutes, Mihai, no problem.
Yeah, of course I won't miss the opportunity to advertise the explaining strategy course. But I'm sorry, there is no other way to dig deeper into these things unless we discuss this on some case studies with practical things in front of us, with tables and matrices and correlations and debates about one thing or another, and experiment in practice, a way of thinking, which of course it's clarified during the sessions, which are, let's say, theory sessions, and then practice sessions, which allow us to see how this works and dig deeper to the level where we wanted, and have a full interaction, live interaction, to be able to clarify things further. But some of the things we can clarify today. So I'm looking forward to any questions that you might have. And again, some of them might be online. And then if you remember something that you wanted to ask later on, you can always reach me using LinkedIn and deal with those questions offline. So how did you like the topic today?
It's a fantastic topic. There is no question about it, Mihai. Yeah. So yeah, I think everybody is listening. So please ask questions, because it's so heavy. Okay. So they need to take it.
I'll use the opportunity to ask your indulgence for my digital transformation that I wanted to experiment on my own person.
I think that's
so I said, what the
fantastic.
heck is
Actually,
digital transformation? So let's.
it's a big change, and I think it's quite appropriate at this point of time.
Well, if let me tell you, if the digital transformation of myself won't last too long, I'll get back to my previous look. So
Yeah, maybe the most important thing is you need to feel comfortable about it with it. That's,
I'm trying to.
yeah. Once you feel comfortable, I think it's fantastic. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity of again presenting these thoughts and these ideas, which took me years after years and lots of things to read and try and practice and confront people who are looking at me and said, "What the heck is this guy telling us? We don't understand the thing." So he should figure out better what he's trying us to make us do during this workshop. And little by little, I learned what works and what doesn't, and that's the outcome. Sharing it with you.
Yeah, I think it's not about the concept. It's about to make it a little simpler. That's a challenge. Okay, there is no debate about the validity of the concept. There is no question about it. Only thing is how to make a little simpler to consume for everybody. That's something which is required. I think you have quite good alumni now.
Oh yeah. I think there were 112 last year.
Yeah, so that's a quite that's a quite decent alumni. So that helps to make it easy for everybody to communicate, because I use it heavily. In fact, some part of the strategy formulation, especially the cognitive model and the penta model part and strategy formulation, all those things, we are already just trying to embed it somehow. Okay.
Lokesh, you are putting some salt on some open wound. I'm struggling with the editor to reach a final version there. I had to split into two books. One of the is the strategy clockwork and the other one is the penta model. I just wish probably it will be the last thing when before the meteorite strikes Earth, and I'll be able to publish the books by then. So yeah.
I think that helped everybody to crystallize the thought process.
Yeah, I agree. It will happen. So be patient. It will happen. We'll have the books.
Yeah. One question is, since we talk about technology, the Gen AI and LLMs, okay. So how does that can be used by the organizations now for strategy formulations and all? Okay. Sometimes what I experience with all discussions with the people is AI is good. There is no question about it. AI help a lot. But the thing is, it cannot replace the human brain and the business strategies kind of thing. So what is your advice? How to use the AI for the strategy formulation and execution, please?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me tell you this. You've seen that because I'm an engineer, and engineers thinks in terms of inputs and outputs and logical rules inside between them. Then it's of course something that pushed me to think about strategy, both formulation and execution, in more algorithmic way. And as a matter of fact, Kaplan and Norton are both. David Norton was an engineer, and Kaplan and Norton is an engineer initially, and even Michael Porter was an aeronautics engineer. So engineers think in a certain way, and they have algorithms in their heads and try to put things in logical relationship. And you've seen from the full cycle of the strategies that I've presented that the one of the main ideas, how can we make that logical? Because logical, it's clearer and simpler to understand, and that's, I think, is essential. Now, I'm dreaming about a moment in time when supervised by humans, a set of algorithms connected to each other are able to go through all these stages that you've seen and actually connect inputs with outputs and apply some logic and at least suggest some output from each of the stages and be able to significantly lead to some more how should I say AI assisted way of actually formulating and then strategic planning. The implementation of the strategy formulated. Of course, that's a dream. I don't know if it will ever become reality, but certainly AI helps. For the last two projects where I've used some implementation with some teams in there are small to medium companies, and it was a micro consulting. I was rather facilitating the implementation. For the strategic analysis, we always start in both cases. We used the ChatGPT to suggest driving forces and what might happen, and even scenario planning. We used it a little bit, and it works. It's a tool for the moment that can complement. For instance, we did the strategic analysis ourselves. And then we said, okay, let's see what ChatGPT says about this. And we were surprised to see that approximately 20% of the final opportunities and threats that we've identified were actually done by ChatGPT, not by us. So it helped us complement what we did. We could have done it the other way around. Start with ChatGPT and say, okay, let's judge what ChatGPT suggests, and let's see if something seems to be missing or something like this. So, of course, for the moment, the AI, the large language models are actually suggesting a combination of good and not so good things. So we need to filter whatever they're saying. Some of the things are still too general. There is a big dependency on the way that you're generating the prompts. And that was one way of using it. Now about strategy execution, I'm working on a project that actually produces almost better results at every iteration of the algorithm, which allows us to input the chain of hypotheses that we use through the stages that you have seen, and actually connect them in a system of relationships that allows us to teach the algorithm how to identify the most probable invalid hypothesis. Because we look at the scorecard and say, okay, which are the invalid hypotheses? Where did this come from? Where did we go wrong? And as the algorithm helps us pinpoint some of the places of intersection of multiple, because we don't have a single red objective on a scorecard. We typically have several or KPIs. And so, okay, are they intersecting anywhere along the chain of hypotheses that we have used? And that was the algorithm was able to help us take some decisions about what corrections or adaptation is required. So it's promising, and I don't know. I will be able to push this as far as I'll be able to, and then of course others will need to take it over and bring it to a more complete and more comprehensive and better solution. So. Yeah, there will be some articles about this, and that's what I did in practical terms about using AI, which is of course valuable in terms of of technical tools that we can use as part of the process.
Great. So we have used two models in our strategy. So one is the talk to data. That means instead of asking a query or something, you write a SQL query or something, you can just type a natural language. Okay, ask for whatever performance of X compared to Y. What is the total of this overall aggregated performance or whatever? So you can just ask the data. The system will do all the NLP and other stuff and bring the data from the history from the database. That is one we have tried, and it's working. Only my problem is a little slow because it's taking the computing resource. Otherwise, we have included it. Another one is the interview chatbot. So you can just do interview for a voice interview. So you can conduct it instead of writing a text, because people are very careful while writing it. So while talking, they can feel it will be easy for them. So what we did is we tried to convert all this audio to text, then do some sort of sentiment analysis. So that is working actually. So, but it cannot replace the human thing. So a human part is very critical because we are not sure at this point of time.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Okay, thank you very much again for the opportunity, and I'd encourage everyone to ask questions, and if I can help clarify some things, it will be my honor.
Please feel free. Yeah, every participants, you can write any queries, and then we are happy to coordinate with Mihai to get you connected, and then you get to answer all your queries. So thank you very much.